A 1941 clinical study in Britain measured a vitamin C concentration so extreme that scientists initially dismissed the results as laboratory error. The sample contained 1,700 milligrams of ascorbic acid per 100 grams, 40 times more concentrated than the orange, 60 times more potent than the lemon. The researchers tested again. Same result. This was not a tropical fruit requiring greenhouses and controlled climates. This was a roadside plant that thrived in abandoned lots, highway shoulders, and forgotten corners of suburban America. It required no fertilizer, no irrigation, no human intervention whatsoever. Yet the modern food system classified it as invasive. The distinction was not botanical. It was economic. You cannot pack this plant into controlled atmosphere storage for 9 months. You cannot breed it for uniform color and size. You cannot mechanize its harvest without destroying the delicate fruit. The plant that saved Europe from scurvy during the World War II grows wild across North America today, yet it does not exist in a single grocery store. Rosa rugosa, the beach rose, produces fruits called hips, nature's most concentrated source of vitamin C. We walk past it every autumn, oblivious. When German U-boats blockaded British shipping lanes in 1940, citrus imports collapsed overnight. The Royal Navy faced a crisis. Scurvy had returned. The Ministry of Food issued a directive: collect rose hips from hedgerows, roadsides, and coastal dunes. Volunteers gathered 450 tons in the first year alone. Children received rosehip syrup as a vitamin C supplement throughout the war. The program was not a quaint folk remedy. It was a national survival strategy backed by government chemists and clinical trials. British hospitals documented that a single tablespoon of rosehip syrup delivered more ascorbic acid than 12 oranges. The wild plant performed better than the industrial crop. After the war ended and trade routes reopened, the rosehip program was quietly discontinued. The system returned to importing citrus from thousands of miles away rather than harvesting vitamin C from native hedgerows. Convenience defeated biology. Shelf life defeated nutrition. The rosehip became invisible again, relegated to the status of ornamental shrub or invasive nuisance. Modern oranges contain approximately 53 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams of edible fruit. Fresh rose hips contain between 1,000 and 1,700 milligrams. The difference is not subtle. A single rose hip delivers the vitamin C equivalent of 20 oranges. Beyond ascorbic acid, the fruit concentrates bioflavonoids, lycopene, beta-carotene, and vitamin E in ratios that synthetic supplements cannot replicate. The whole fruit creates synergistic effects that isolated compounds do not. Laboratory analysis reveals that rose hips also contain polyphenols that enhance collagen synthesis and immune response. These are the same compounds pharmaceutical companies extract, patent, and sell as antioxidant formulas. Yet the original source grows wild, free, and ignored. The industrial food system cannot profit from a plant that requires no planting, no fertilizer, no pesticides, and no harvest machinery. So it is classified as a weed. The taxonomy is economic, not ecological. A weed is simply a plant that refuses to generate revenue. Rosa rugosa produces fruit that ripens unevenly over a 6-week period in autumn. Each bush yields hips in varying sizes, colors, and moisture content. Mechanical harvesters designed for uniform crops cannot process this biological diversity. The fruit must be hand-picked at peak ripeness, which occurs on different branches at different times. This variability makes the rose hip incompatible with industrial agriculture. Factory processing demands uniformity. Supermarkets demand year-round availability. Distributors demand fruit that can survive 2 weeks in refrigerated trucks without degradation. The rose hip offers none of this. It offers only extreme nutrition, cold hardiness, and the radical concept that food can grow without corporate ownership. The system rejected it not because it lacked value, but because it lacked control. You cannot patent a wild rose. You cannot genetically modify it for shelf stability. You cannot force it into monoculture plantations. So it disappeared from the collective food consciousness, visible only to those who remember what food looked like before the factory. Rosa rugosa tolerates temperatures down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. It thrives in coastal dunes where salt spray kills most cultivated plants. It grows in abandoned industrial sites where soil contamination prevents conventional agriculture. The plant establishes itself in roadside gravel, parking lot edges, and chain-link fence lines, spaces the industrial system considers worthless. While greenhouse tomatoes require climate control and daily monitoring, the beach rose produces fruit in conditions that would kill a commercial crop. Its root system reaches depths of 6 feet, accessing water and minerals unavailable to shallow-rooted annuals. Once established, the plant requires no irrigation, even during drought. No fertilizer supplementation. No pest control. It simply exists year after year, producing vitamin C concentrations that make citrus seem nutritionally empty. The rose hip ripens precisely when autumn frost kills the last garden vegetables, extending the fresh food season deep into November. This timing is not accidental. Evolution designed the fruit to provide critical nutrients exactly when other food sources vanish. Yet we abandon this biological calendar in favor of year-round supermarket produce shipped from distant continents. Medieval European texts documented preparations made from rose hips for conditions related to vitamin deficiency. Sailors in the 1600s carried dried hips on long voyages as protection against scurvy, long before citrus became standard. Indigenous peoples across northern climates traditionally harvested the fruit each autumn and incorporated it into winter food supplies. Historical records from Scandinavia describe rose hip soups consumed during the coldest months when fresh vegetables were unavailable. These practices were not superstition. They were biological necessity encoded in cultural knowledge. The vitamin C concentration in rose hips prevented the connective tissue breakdown, bleeding gums, and immune collapse that defined scurvy. Before the pharmaceutical industry synthesized ascorbic acid in laboratories, people obtained it from wild plants that required no cultivation. The transition from wild harvesting to industrial supplementation represented not progress, but dependence. We traded autonomy for convenience. Free nutrition for packaged pills. The knowledge of how to identify, harvest, and utilize wild vitamin sources has been systematically erased from modern education. Children learn about the food pyramid, but not about the rose hip. The result is a population that walks past concentrated nutrition without recognition. The designation invasive species often reveals more about economic priorities than ecological impact. Rosa rugosa is labeled invasive in some coastal regions because it spreads aggressively and outcompetes native beach grasses. This is true. It also provides critical erosion control on unstable dunes, creates dense habitat for ground-nesting birds, and produces fruit that feeds wildlife through winter. The classification ignores these benefits because they generate no revenue. Conservation agencies spend millions attempting to eradicate rose hips from beaches, while supermarkets import vitamin C supplements manufactured in distant factories. The logic is purely economic. A plant that grows without permission threatens the industrial model. If people can harvest vitamin C from roadsides, they do not purchase bottled supplements. If communities can gather free nutrition from public land, they do not depend on the food distribution system. The rose hip represents biological sovereignty. That is why it is called a weed. Weeds are plants that refuse to participate in the economy of scarcity. They offer abundance without transaction, nutrition without purchase, resilience without dependence. The industrial system cannot tolerate this. Rosa rugosa flowers in June and develops fruit throughout summer. The hips ripen to deep red or orange by late September, often persisting on branches until December. Peak vitamin C concentration occurs after the first light frost, when cold temperatures convert starches to sugars. Each hip contains numerous seeds surrounded by fleshy tissue, the edible portion. The plant propagates both through seeds and underground runners, forming dense thickets over time. In garden settings, Rosa rugosa requires no special soil preparation or amendments. It establishes from bare root cuttings planted in early spring or late autumn. Once the root system develops, the plant becomes virtually indestructible, surviving neglect that would kill cultivated roses. The thorny stems deter deer and create natural fencing. Flowers provide late-season pollen for bees when most garden plants have finished blooming. The entire system functions as a perennial food source, requiring minimal human intervention. This is permaculture in its most essential form: plant once, harvest forever. Yet the modern gardener is taught to value hybrid tea roses that require constant feeding, spraying, and winter protection while producing nothing edible. The rose hip offers both beauty and sustenance, but the ornamental industry profits only from plants that demand continual inputs. The rose hip growing along the highway shoulder contains more concentrated nutrition than anything available in the produce aisle. This is not metaphor. This is measurable chemistry. 40 times the vitamin C of an orange growing without irrigation in roadside gravel. Free, perennial, resilient. The industrial food system cannot compete with this biology, so it reclassified the plant as worthless. Every autumn, millions of pounds of rose hips ripen and fall to the ground, unharvested. The waste is not accidental. It is structural. A system built on scarcity cannot acknowledge abundance. The revolution begins when we recognize that the most nutritious food often grows in the spaces the industrial system abandoned. The ditches, the dunes, the forgotten edges where nature operates without permission. History repeats. In times of crisis, societies rediscover wild plants that sustained their ancestors. We do not need to wait for crisis. The rose hip is there now, waiting.